Welcome to the Association for Talent Development Austin Chapter Podcast Series, Humanity at Work, where we talk about how to bring humanity back to the workplace. Today's episode is about all those times when you feel that you're constantly being misunderstood. Today, we'll talk about using communication styles to improve learning experiences. And I am your host, Melissa Love. Today's episode is brought to you by Everybody Up. Everybody Up provides experiential communication workshops on leadership, employee engagement, and team building. My guest today is 25-year education veteran and international speaker that delivers training programs to corporations as well as state and federal government agencies throughout the US, the United Kingdom, Mexico, China, and Spain. Behavioral interviewing, talent management processes, conflict management, and neurolinguistic communication are just a few of his specialties. I'm so honored to know him and excited to introduce my audience to one of my favorite people. Please help me in welcoming Bob Lewis. Bob, thank you so much for being here today. I'm so glad. And every time we talk, you fill my cup. So thank you for that. I just feel, whether it be in person or virtually, even though we both know we prefer in person, I always feel
Absolutely
energized afterwards. But I feel like,
back at
you must get me. So whatever communication style you're using on me, it's working.
That's awesome. Well, I feel the same way, Melissa. You always fill my bucket too, and that, I'm glad we're here today because communication's everything, isn't it? Just
It is.
it makes or breaks teams and relationships, and so I'm real excited to be here. Thanks for having me.
Yeah, I think that any problem you have in the workforce almost can always be tied back to communication, whether it be bad or good, quite honestly.
Absolutely.
And with education and learning and development and training and development, all we're doing is pushing information out. So it's those little phrases and things that we can adjust to help our message and be more impactful on the people that are hearing it, right?
Absolutely.
So, I have some people that I work with that almost every time I say something, it feels like it's taken the exact opposite way. And it's frustrating and they always take it in the negative way. And I don't know what I'm doing wrong, but it just goes to show that because we didn't all grow up with the same parents and we didn't grow up in the same house and we didn't have the same life journey, our perspectives are so amazingly different that something that I think is super nice, she can take as rude. And I'm just like, what's happening here? And I know that if I had to work with this person a lot, there would be some problems. And I would absolutely have to adjust how I work with her and how I speak with her and what words I choose and what phrases I use. I hope it doesn't mean that I'm a bad communicator.
No, absolutely not.
Yeah.
Absolutely not, because I think everybody receives and processes the information differently. I think the ticket is to, figure out, I had to decide early on that it wasn't about me when I'm talking, it was about them. And so, that had to shift pretty quickly if I wanted a relationship to be better.
Right. Well, and you were telling me a story about one of your bosses that you had back in the day and how you like to pace the room and it's just, again, how you approach things versus how he approached things. Can you tell my listeners about that?
Sure, but let me kind of preface that a little bit. I want to go back to elementary for just a moment.
Oh, yeah.
I remember when I was little, I always had the comment of, please tell Bobby to stay in his seat and please close your mouth. And I asked a lot of questions and I had, got in trouble for it a lot, but not until 10th grade, this teacher told me, I get you. She understood that, like you said, getting up, pacing around, asking questions was valuable for my learning. She never talked about herself. And so, that impacted me. I remember her name was Miss Chestnut. She was an amazing human being because she allowed me to be me, kind of like you. But also, going back to the boss thing, I did have a boss that was very, I want to say serial in nature, not to put labels, but very sequential. And I'm kind of like this random drive-by sometimes where it's like, oh my gosh. And so that I'm processing things differently. And he just said, you walk around too much when I'm talking and it's disrespectful. Of course, I'm a nice person. I said, I apologize. I don't mean to, but I really process the information. He goes, oh, that's just some communication stuff. So it hit me that day that maybe he's not willing to flex for me. So I have to buck it up. And perhaps I need to sit down that day. So I actually did a little experiment with him and presented information in a very sequential manner. He liked the facts. He didn't like to hear about your weekend and everything.
Right.
And you know what? Slowly our relationship improved. It's not that I've ever really cared for him, as there's people we like and don't like in this world, but we have to work with them. He was my boss. He paid my check, so I had to navigate. And I even asked him one day, "Can you shift a little bit? This is what I've been doing." No. So that is what it is. I can't hold resentment and anger around that because it's not worth it. And so, I've learned that, sometimes you just have to buck it up and what I call is flex your style, shift to how they need information. And maybe one day I will get it too. I don't know.
Well, and some people are just not capable of adjusting. And I like to say that maybe that boss just didn't know how to.
Yeah, that's true.
And you might have also, I talk a lot about vulnerability. You might have made him feel very vulnerable in that moment. So he's like, no, I'm not going to change for Bob.
Right.
Bob's got to get in line with whatever I'm saying.
Right.
And
Absolutely.
it's a vulnerable place anytime when you ask somebody to change the way they're doing something. Because I can speak also from a place of one of my character flaws is that I don't accept constructive criticism at all. It's just something I'm working through with my therapist, but
Absolutely.
and it's because it puts me in a very vulnerable place because I imagine that he got where he was because of how he did things and the way he did things. And yeah, it just makes me think that again, it was not about you, Bob. It was about him. Totally.
Right.
Totally.
Right. Absolutely.
So as I was preparing for this and looking through some of the materials that you have on your website and the PowerPoint you shared with me, I realized that I was a kinesthetic serial learner. And by that, I know that there were like 6 different learning styles. Bob,
Yes.
can you take us through some of those? And
Yeah, absolutely. So I kind of just a little background noise around it. I fell in love with this assessment that it's called neurolinguistic communication profile. And it was the first time that I thought, oh my goodness, they get how listening and processing looks like. So I've used it. I actually used it with my daughter, and I think it moved her from getting a 59 in algebra to an 86 because she's very kinesthetic. She was in a lecture approach, and her teacher didn't want to do hands-on, and she needs the hands-on stuff. So this whole process of communication styles is where how people receive information. So we receive, and many of you out there in the audience probably know that there's auditory, visual, and kinesthetic. Auditory is, and I'll just give you an example, is I hear what you're saying. Visual is I see what you're saying. Kinesthetic is I feel what you're saying. So kinesthetic to me, I'm very much, you and I are kinesthetics, and we learn through movement and emotion. And so what I have found is that if I understand how people receive information, can I truly go to being non-kinesthetic to visual? Not always. Can I attempt it? Absolutely. I can stay out of my kinesthetic sometimes, and I can go for a visual person. They don't want to move through it. They just want to see it. They want you to hand a piece of paper and say, show it to me, and then leave. Auditory people tend to say, just tell me, call me. They don't necessarily sometimes need to see it. Now, some people may have like the combo platter. They may have all 3. I just have visual and kinesthetic. I want to see it and I want to feel it, move through it. And I don't know if I really want to hear you say it. So, and that's just me. And
Right.
so, but then once it goes inside your brain, it goes into two areas. It's called serial and parallel. And serial is very sequential. Some people may say like bean counters if you were to label human beings in life. And then the negative piece of parallels, oh, you're scattered. But really what it is, serial is very patterns. You look at sequential patterns. Parallel people look at patterns, but they're chunks. They may look at three objects in the air and see how they interrelate. They may not know how to do the steps under it, but they're visionaries. They know how to do it. Sequential people will keep us out of jail. They'll say, hey, you need to have this data to support your big picture. Some people may have both. And then the output of the communication styles is that we either present kinesthetic, visual, or auditory. So it's kind of a cool thing if everybody's ever interested in it. It really kind of rocked my world, and I actually have used it with employees. When I was at Texas Parks and Wildlife, I had my employees take it, and we posted it on our door, and we called it the knock knock day. So that day you had to knock on their door, look at their profile, and look at it and say, okay, I'm going to approach that person based on their style.
I love that.
Phenomenal results. I had two people that didn't like each other. I don't know if they didn't love each other in the end, but they got along better. I remember my support person, her name was Susan. She knocked on my door and she was very serial and I was kinesthetic high. She knocked on my door and I heard her out there going, oh. I said, come on in. It's not that painful. You can play kinesthetic for a while.
Right.
And she just said, so she even used words like, Bob, help me move through this. Bob, how are you feeling about this next project? But when I knocked on her door, I didn't say that. I just said, hey, Susan, these are the 3 steps that you and I talked about. Do you mind looking at it and get back with me? And I left.
Right.
And she said, I appreciate that. She goes, I know it sounds a little canned at first, but eventually that can turned into reality where we actually started, and then jokingly we say, oh, yeah, Bob, I know you're kinesthetic. You need to kind of tame it down, but I will try to adapt to your style. And, I know that 84%, that's interesting data, that employees feel that their managers or other people just don't communicate effectively. I think it goes back to, Melissa, what you're saying is, you're communicating, but maybe, hate to break the bad news, maybe we aren't communicating effectively.
Right.
And maybe we need to make the change. And change is hard.
Right.
But this ultimately changed how I approached people. And I didn't do it every day. So that's just, we are who we are. I've been with myself for, most of my life. 70s were a little fun, but I've been with myself. And it's, I think it's interesting. So those are kind of the 3 different communication styles, importantly, of like when I said about kinesthetic, visual, and auditory. Very interesting training that I've done, since 2001. That I just love it. Clients love it too. And they've seen changes in their teams and how they communicate.
Well, and I think it's so amazing, especially when you start a new job. It's all about communication. Is like, I don't understand that person, or I don't know what that person's all about, or what was that person really saying, or why did we just have that meeting?
Right.
Why did I just spend 90 minutes in there? So all of those things happen. It's all because of communication and not understanding one another, because our communication styles are so dramatically different. And a lot of our listeners are instructional designers, and since we communicate differently, we learn differently. Does that mean that for every single curriculum package I put out, I have to design 6 different things or 3 different things? How do you adapt it to the different learning types?
Right.
It just seems like a lot of work if I'm going to have to do 6 for every single one.
So let me tell you the easy way, because reality is in instructional design. That would be crazy to do that for each, So for me, one is first up, in the training, I make people aware that we're all different within our communication styles, and perhaps even share those styles with them so they are aware of them. And also is that I make sure that within the instructional design, because I'm an instructional designer and curriculum designer, is that I embed activities throughout. So I'm going to have some serial activities where people sequence. I'm going to also have some kind of big picture items with groups so that both sides can see it, because the serial people, if they're purely serial, they will sometimes, if I give them, what do you want to be when you grow up? They're like, huh? What they want to say is, what do you want to be when you grow up? And tell me, what are your next 5-year plan? I have to put data in there. So I embed, visual and auditory, clips. And probably a lot of instructional designers do this already, where they have a lot of visual presentation. They have people that get up and talk. They present themselves because that's how they learn. They hear themselves and they retain that information. But also there's some activity and movement. Melissa, you're well known for the kinesthetic activities in your class. I've been to them, where you have a lot of movement. But you can tell the ones that don't have kinesthetic, they're like, oh no, I'm going to be judged. Somebody's watching me. And the other crazy kinesthetic, I'll learn about 18 things right now. And so, I think it is being aware that the instructional designer has to put into the design is asking questions to gauge how their audience receives information.
Right.
So for example, let's say you do a scenario and I say it out loud to somebody, but I don't show it. Or if I'm talking out loud, you have to watch your audience and say, oh, they need a graph. Oh, that table needs to get up and walk through some things. So I think it's not, I don't think you have to, I think it's just an awareness for the presenter and the instructional designer, if they're separate, to get together and say, hey, help me out here. How can I embed a couple things to make me aware? And it could be just in the instructor notes, is that you ask them questions like this. Hey, does everybody see what I'm saying, hear what I'm saying, or feel what I'm saying? And maybe some like questions embedded so you capture those people that have those styles. And I have found that too. And I use it a lot just because I'm so aware of this tool, that I know that as an instructor or trainer, that I will be talking in big picture land, and there are the serials plotting against me. He's not giving me the detail. Shut down. And I'm like, oh yeah, no, I need to go back because it's about them, not me.
Right. Well, and I can, being a serial, anybody that talks in too much of a big picture, I already start to input the missing pieces. And yes, it does distract from whatever that person's saying, because I'm stopping to focus on what you're saying and I'm filling in those pieces. That's just what my brain automatically does.
That's a good point. I think what I have to be is aware that I might ask you a question. Hey, I've talked about these 3 items. Hey, Melissa, what do you think are the steps that are involved in this? I'm just curious. Mm-hmm. Then I engage you.
And I'd be like, let me pick me.
And I would, because you would put the steps, and you would help. It's about you. You would help the audience, and it would help you because you would retain that information. You would say, right. Yeah, I put those steps in that class. That makes sense. And you might even implement it.
Right. As consultants, as we both are, amongst many other things, do you sometimes make assumptions about the type of learners your audience is based on their occupation? For instance, I work with a lot of software engineers. So do you try to label them a little bit and maybe try to create something around that if you think that they're maybe leaning a little bit more one way or another? Or does occupation not have a part in that at all?
I try not to, but absolutely. Because I do work with a lot of engineers. I have a client in Austin that is very heavily audio design engineers. And when they take this assessment, it's interesting. Some of them have a balance of having parallel and serial. Mm-hmm. But if I do go in with that bias, and this is such a great reminder, Melissa, for me, because, with unconscious bias and all that, the narrative around that I do go into that. Because, I was raised in Nebraska, a rural farm. My parents were very German. So I have all that stuff. And so I heard biases. So I think this has helped me mitigate, I don't know if that's the right word, but minimize that before I go in, is, pause. Right. Let that person share who they are, and then move from there. And I've had to do that just because I'm a human. We do that. We hear labels all day long about people, and I don't like labels, but we label people. And it's such an unfair strategy for me if I go in there, because I think what'll happen, it will affect the learning of others. So, you asking that question is just a really great reminder to write myself a note, especially in instructional design, to have some of those reminders. I think it's a great instructional design piece to remind that you asked a question because you might be leaving the audience out. This is a good time because this is a tough topic, and it has to be delivered in 3 different ways in order for it to really work. If that makes sense.
Yeah, and one of the things that pops in my mind is something that I teach all the time is really, really to be present in the moment. You can plan and plan and plan because I love to prepare. And I used to be, just horrified of a pregnant pause when I was giving, a speech or whatever it was. But I really applied improvisation has really taught me to be in the moment with the people that I'm with, whether that be a one-on-one conversation or a group workshop. And I think that goes back to, you can plan until you're blue in the face, but taking those moments during a curriculum delivery to say, how is this being received? What's going on with my audience? And, and reading that in the moment and adjusting. And hopefully we're all good enough that we can adjust on the fly. Doing it long enough, you can. And I know 25 years, obviously you can adjust on the fly. And sometimes I've found that those people that are not my experiential learners really do throw up some roadblocks. I had somebody come to one of my workshops once, came in, sat down, crossed his feet and his arms and said, "We're not going to talk about ourselves today, are we? Because I don't do that." And I was like, whoo. And that was day 1, morning 1 of a 5-day seminar I was doing with this company. So I was like, okay, put my big girl panties on because we're going to go,
Right.
Challenge accepted. And that's really sometimes what our audience is doing is they're saying, ooh, I'm going to challenge you.
Right,
Even though they don't necessarily think in those terms. That's what that guy was doing.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's funny. We've had those. But that, sometimes they become the champions later.
Yeah.
And they discover something about themselves that maybe they did before. And that's kind of cool for them.
Yeah.
That's a cool story.
Yeah, I accepted that challenge. And all of my surveys are anonymous, and he was difficult through the entire both sessions I did with him. But other people in the group praised me for how well I dealt with it.
Right.
And again, all my surveys are anonymous, but one of my questions, I can't exactly remember the wording, but his answer was, we're a tech company. We don't need to know how to communicate.
Yeah.
So I'm like, okay, well, I did not get through to that person, but perhaps next time.
Yeah, maybe something happens later on where you think, oh, maybe, because he probably has communication issues that, that he needs to figure out. Interesting. Yeah, we've all had those. They develop your character piece, don't they?
Ooh, yeah.
Yeah.
All right, I always like to end every podcast with some rapid fire questions. So, Bob, are you ready?
Awesome. I think I'm ready.
What is your biggest workplace fear?
That's a great question. And I think there's probably a lot of fears, but probably the biggest one is, and I'm going to speak from a manager because I managed for about 28 years. And my biggest fear is that I didn't allow, and that sounds like such a micromanaging word, but allow that person to be who they are, but also put them in a spot where they belong and work. Because not everybody has that. Not everybody drives down I-35 and goes, "Oh, I love my job." Right. And so for me, my biggest fear is that, and it's a couple of pieces, that did I treat that person fairly? And if I did have to let them go, did I terminate them fairly? I actually had one of my fears was maybe resolved, that I actually had a person I terminated. She said she hugged me. I've never had a person who I fired hug me. Right. But she goes, "I know that I didn't do well." And I said, I'm sorry for that too. So, the biggest, I guess, to really boil it down a little get a little sequential here, is that were they allowed to use their talents? And I don't think I always have done that.
Right. Awesome. What is the biggest impact someone else made on you at work?
Hmm. So I think it goes back. Actually, I was a principal in previous life too, and I had another principal told me that you can get up and present. People seem to like you, and I think you need to use that. And I believe in you.
Oh,
And I remember presenting the first time at a state conference in Dallas. I think I talked 800 miles a minute, and it was an hour presentation. I was done in 10, and they watched. They said, "You have the content. Let's work on it." And even she said, "You can do it." And through that, I think it guided me toward this crazy world of presentation. That it's a crazy fun world to be a presenter. Yeah, so
I think that you did what I do is yes, many of my first presentations were at rapid speed. And I feel like I already talk a little bit fast anyway. So once you get those nerves and then you just go, yeah.
absolutely.
Yeah. What's the one thing you can do every day to make a positive impact on the people that you work with, whether it be employees, supervisors, coworkers?
Hmm. Yeah, it's a great question. And what I would say to that is listen.
Listen.
Listen, that the power of listening to a person who has a problem that comes to you and wants you to listen, usually doesn't want a solution from you. And I found that early on. Somebody told me, a lot of wise mentors I had said, "Bob, listen, don't talk." Because Melissa, you and I can talk.
Right, right.
And so that's hard for me because I want to help people and everything. But she said, you could be helpful if you listen, and if that's all you do. And I found that, maybe in the last 10 years of my management, I started doing more of that. And the impact was high because it took me out of me and into them.
Right. No, I love that. And when my husband and I you have to go through like the counseling before you get married. And
Right.
Pastor Joe told us sometimes you just need to be for one another instead of the fixer. So we like to
That.
you just be for me right now. I don't want you to fix, just be. Yeah.
I love that. Love that.
Yeah. What is the one thing more managers of people should do more, and at what frequency?
Mm-hmm. So it kind of goes back to communication. I hate to beat it to death, but I think it's paramount in creating that. Well, one, I love that sometimes you just need to be. I think managers need to get to know their employees more. I found the managers who knew their employees personally, even. I know people are like, I don't want to do that, but know things about them in their life. I have found when I did that, at least, is that like performance appraisals, conversations, coaching was easier.
Right.
Because that person knew that I knew them. But also, I think the other piece is that being with them during a struggle in their life, because we have struggles. Good Lord. Like last year, there were about 8 million of them.
Right.
I think it was an opportunity for managers to ask questions saying, how are you doing? And what do you need?
Right.
Not what's wrong, because we either can be problem-based or solution-based. What do you need? And then pause. Don't go into this whole, how we are. What do you need? And I'd love to help you, blah, 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 blah. No, what do you need? And I think good managers, at least the managers I've had, and I've not had a bunch of them. I've had a few. I can see 3 in my head that I love to death. Right. The others, they were good people, just weren't a fit for me. And so what do you need?
I love it. I love it. That is today's episode. I would like to thank you, my listener, for your time, and our guest, Bob Lewis, for his contribution to the show. Look out for our next episode on tdaustin.org. Be sure to like our LinkedIn and Facebook pages. If you would like to be featured on this show, send your request to me at podcasts@tdaustin.org or reach out to me on LinkedIn.